And there we go. Real-time strategy games are going through a renaissance right now. People are talking about wanting to play some of the classic games of their youth, maybe some of the games they feel have more depth or soul that they just don't feel in modern games. Even modern games, if you're going by the perspective of StarCraft 2, were something like 15 years old. And yet, of all of the new titles, whose names I won't besmirch this video by mentioning, of all of them coming out, they seem to have a problem. They can maintain the competitive player base, but they fail to capture the popular imagination. And for a while, there was a sense of doomerism. Maybe this is just because there isn't a title that can capture what the player base looked like. Maybe gamers were more hardcore in the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s. Maybe that's why the RTS genre hasn't been doing so well as of late, that those players who were stuck with a more hardcore experience are now have so many more casual options. What's great about the Scouring, this game that this RTS that came out that plays very simply is that it shows that all of that is complete like bollocks. Rather than fight over 100 concurrent players or have measuring contests about the fact that they have 150 or maybe that they have 46 people on Twitch today instead of 37, the Scouring's numbers are actually fantastic. 1,149 max players as of when I just looked it up on Steam charts earlier today, February 4th, 2025, with the peak concurrence or that all-time high happening 2 days ago, the current one being about 1,049 before it goes on an upswing, because this game is actually more popular over in the East and seemingly in Europe than it is over here. So I want to talk about what the Scouring gets right, what this game does that all of these spiritual successors and modern remakes and retellings and things that have the veneer, the shine of RTS games promise to be, but nevertheless fail to be. Much like how Shovel Knight says that it is a retro game, yet it plays with modern game sensibilities. All these new RTS titles outside of the Scouring say that they're a return to form, but much like the IGN writers who constantly use that only to say that they don't know what to do for their page count, they actually feel a little bland, like they've got empty calories in them. So let's talk about what the Scouring does well. People were complaining they didn't know where the rant was going last time, so a little peek behind the curtain for you now. So I'm going to go ahead and show you. This is the Scouring. The RTS future is in its roots, or how the Scouring gets it right. Now, when we're paying attention to how the RTS future is in its roots, that means that I want to lay out something for you if you've not considered it. Probably the worst thing I heard someone say about the movie Shrek was that the giant dance party that happens at the end of Shrek, where all of the characters are talking and having all these character moments and playing around, and it's basically a giant curtain call, was probably the worst thing for them for animated films for the decade going forward. Not because Shrek did anything wrong, but because people used that, LARPed it, mimicked it to try and get some of Shrek's success and followed everything to a T, not realizing that the way that the T was written in Shrek is different. The font was different, the cadence was different, the reasoning was different. It just kind of diluted the waters going forward. I want to extend that analogy now to RTS games with the game StarCraft 2. I love StarCraft 2, played hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours of StarCraft 2. There are a lot of people who have gotten their start in things like esports or gotten paid or achieved some notoriety, some fame because of StarCraft 2. People that I know generally, people that I know in my personal life. I have nothing against the game of StarCraft 2. But one of the things that StarCraft 2 did is it kind of went away from this idea of the casual player base. StarCraft 2 even has a line famously in its campaign, one of the early missions, where it says esports is what you make it, or some equivalent of that. And the problem is that everything that you see inside of StarCraft 2, yes, was trying to solve the problems of what does a modern RTS look like with modern controls, modern sensibilities, and a modern engine in this day, 2010, but it also was trying to be an esport. This was a game that was filled with the brim of the focus of what StarCraft Brood War had been in South Korea, and desperately wanted to keep that magic, recapture that magic, put lightning back in the bottle. And it's not that I think that StarCraft 2 did a particularly bad job in terms of sales, fantastic game, in terms of what it did for the company Blizzard, fantastic. Again, excellent for myself and a bunch of other people as players. Can't really complain about the quality, though there are some nitpicks to be had. But the problem is that all of the new RTSs that have come about after it followed in its trail, as it were, are on the same Oregon Trail. Unfortunately, they didn't realize that the reason that StarCraft 2 was able to get past dysentery and continue on is that StarCraft 2 had the behemoth of World of Warcraft, the previous StarCraft Brood War, an unexpected explosion in the Korean scene and South Korean scene, right? And the indie players and casters and other people and community creators and content creators who wanted to keep the game alive over here. And so those other games tried to follow in the trail of StarCraft 2, not realizing that actually that mountain path that ends in dysentery and ice in the winter is something that they're not equipped to overcome. This is what the Scouring begins with getting right. And this is why I provide all the context. As we finally go 5 minutes in, you can see what I'm doing here. So the first thing is the Scouring. Again, if you've not seen it, go play the Scouring. You can look up the demo for it right now. Great numbers, great number of players, right? First thing that does is that it understands the roots of RTS by appearing noob friendly. Now, what does that mean to appear noob friendly? Well, just on its surface, it presents many of the things that a new player says they didn't like about StarCraft 2 or that they do remember fondly enjoying about older titles, older games, but somehow that soul is missing here. And I want to stress that it appears noob friendly because, as we'll get to later, there's actually a lot of mechanical depth inside of the Scouring, something that its neat facade, its package actually hides. And before we continue on, I want to put this idea, incept this idea into your mind right now, which is that a lot of the older games when I was growing up in the 90s, early 2000s, they were fundamentally made as single player titles or things that you play by yourself. The idea is that you would spend the money if your family had a computer, or if you were in a computer lab or something of that nature, a PC bang if you're overseas, or an internet cafe if you're over here where I live, called various the LAN cafe as well. Depends on what part of the world you're in. The idea was that the game was something that you play because it wasn't necessarily something that you could afford on your own, or if you did, you couldn't guarantee a networked connection that would be strong. That was kind of a geeky, nerdy thing that had to be kept to the side, or that you had to go outside of yourself to find extra knowledge and wisdom to go ahead and peruse and take advantage of. And so games were made with a focus on the single player campaign, the single player experience. And then after that, almost as an afterthought, almost as if a thing that was put in to help the developers themselves test the game, they had LAN, they had multiplayer capabilities. Now, I know there are various studios and games that say they made multiplayer first, then worked on the single player content after that, after they made the editor. I would suggest to you, if you've not looked into this topic, that those are a minority of games. And that's part of the reason why those older games have this feeling of richness and depth to them. Because in a world that's increasingly interconnected as the one that we live in now, in the grimdark, borderline dystopian future of 2025, when everyone is connected, that actually means no one gets to be alone. And actually then everyone is alone in their forced connectedness. This is not a psychology thing. This is not an anthropological study on people who have access to strong internet. So we'll just continue on. The Scouring is very new player friendly. So the first thing I want to stress is when you go into the Scouring, right, it does a bunch of things that indicate to you that this is not a super hardcore experience and you're going to get your fucking dick stomped on and everyone's going to crush you. This is serious business. When you load into the current version of the Scouring of the demo, again, February 4th, 2025, what you see are 3 units. I believe it's a knight, a muncher, and an archer. Those are the names of the units at the current time. They're on the left-hand side of the screen. They play a looping audio track, and you just see these 3 units that are, if you've ever worked inside of Unreal, or any game creator like this, in any engine, they just look like they're looping their idle animation. They're not just standing there, but they are going, something like this, right? And it gives this impression when you look at it too that, it's a bit dark, it's a bit grim, it's closer to, let's say, like Goblin Slayer than it is like Sword Art Online, if you want to use an anime reference, right? And that's good because Steam likes dark games, and we'll get to that in a bit more. But the thing too is that the menu is very new player friendly. Yes, even the UI is new player friendly. I don't think modern games really understand that when they're using like this Aptos narrow font that looks super cool and it slashes in and they have cutscenes coming down and there's a big explosion, a bunch of cool shit is happening, and you can see holy shit, guys, we're showing you our new game. Here's a big battle with all the stuff attacking into each other. Look at the micro of this guy. That's not new player friendly. This simple UI is new player friendly. What does the simple UI look like? It's very simple. Single player, multiplayer, settings, exit, and to the left, right here, you have to look for it. If you have to know what you're looking for are replays. And you might think that's crazy. Why would I have to know what to look for in replays? I'm used to more competitively minded RTS titles, and you don't understand that by saying that, you're outing yourself. Because one of the brilliancies, if we want to use a chess idea, of the original StarCraft was that you could play ranked, you could play ladder, you could play against other people, but you had to connect to an external server. You had to know what channels to join in. You had to know where the strong players were and in what channels they were in. You had to reach out to them in some way. And everyone else was busy playing a super fun game. You can play Crash RPG, and you can go play big game hunters like 2v2v2v2v2. You can play fastest zero clut maps. You can do all of these things like Warcraft 3 obviously had a litany of things like impossible bosses and even launched with games like War Chasers. You had to go out of your way to find ranked. And this is what one of the things the Scouring does that makes it look new player friendly. Also because people have a thing in their head, it's called primacy of learning. Primacy of learning says that the first thing, we would think, as if we're all super hyper rational individuals, we would think that if we learn 4 things, we weight all of them 25%. Primacy of learning says that when we learn something, the thing that we learn first, we assign an unequal weight. We give it more heft. And so by putting the single player as the first thing that you see and the right-hand side of the screen, going from the top down, the English-speaking world or the world of people who their language follows that framework, they see single player. That encourages them to think this isn't a super hardcore 1v1 ranked game, right? So they see single player. What does single player look like? It is by default a 1v1v1 between yourself and 2 AI. Now, notice what happened here. It is not by default a 1v1. It is not by default, all right, listen, you want to learn this game? Cool. We're going to set you up with an AI. They're going to smoke you. And then, this is kind of the logic that I saw in the No Frauds Club episode with, what is his name? The Electric Underground, right? Where they were talking about I believe it was Cosmonarchy. I'm doing a terrible job. The Brood War game map with extra races and factions. And the idea was, we'll put you in 1v1 and then you immediately have to go in and our tutorials will teach you how to play ranked. And even though the AI is very difficult inside of this game, it's actually not that crazy hard. But even if it were, notice again, it's not a 1v1 game. It's a 1v1v1 game. And you can set different teams. So yes, by default, a lot of you with more legacy RTS skill and experience are going to be like, yeah, turn off that AI or keep it in. Who cares? Set them all to different teams because that's what it is by default and go. But what you can actually do in the menu is that you can say, I want to set myself against both AI. I can control whether the AI group up against me ever or only when they're losing. Maybe I don't want them to group up against me. Maybe I do want 1v1. Maybe I want 1v1v1 because it makes the game a little more imbalanced, right? Maybe the AIs can take each other out and I can attack them. And this is giving that like diffusion of responsibility. The whole game is not on me to win. The other thing too you could do is set yourself and an AI against the other AI. So you could do a pseudo comp stomp. You can change the teams to do that. And this is super important because it means that the first flavor the game gives you is that this is a team game. This is, even when you're playing by yourself, even with AI, this is a team game. This is a group endeavor. This is just kind of like go around and have fun and do the things, right? So now let's get back out of that. Let's say you don't want to look at that. You want to look at replays. I didn't even put that in here, but for those of you who are like, oh, but where is his notes? So replay is hidden. So here we go. Here's the part we're talking about now. So if you want to access the replays in the Scouring, you have to go to the right of single player and click a play button, which will then open up a separate screen that says, or a separate window, a pop-up that says, what replays do you want to look at? Here are the ones that you have that are saved. This is deliberately very hard to find. Again, because it's not a thing that says replays, super important. 1v1 is the hardcore thing, and that's why you would watch replays, because you want to watch everything to get as good as you possibly can. No, they understand. The Scouring understands that we want players to play the game to have fun, and what's fun about or interesting about the most devoted, most passionate people inside of the game is they will ask the question or look, and they will be pleasantly surprised to find replays, but they'll go find that information out themselves. And it's actually worth making it a bit obtuse for those extremely dedicated, hardcore 1v1 people or people who've put in a ton of hours and actually want to research the game, because that's what a replay is. You're researching your game, right? You're updating yourself. You're improving yourself. You're trying to get extra context and information, right? Those people, it's okay to make it a bit more obtuse for them to access that information if it means not scaring out to the new players. Now, underneath single player, which defaults to this FFA, as I said, and you can change the number of AI in there as well, we have multiplayer. Now, I came from StarCraft, right? I actually also came from Command and Conquer and other such things. Do you know what multiplayer says to me in any other game? Again, this is like the Shrek. This is like the song for the curtain call at the end of Shrek, where it's not bad in Shrek, but because it's kind of auto-included as like, yes, good design says that we have to do that. Yes, 100%. It's just ruined the flavor of a lot of these new RTS games. Because when I clicked multiplayer, I expected multiplayer would be like, you click multiplayer, bam, 1v1. Oh, and yeah, Torch says they've been playing for 2 weeks now and they're completely addicted. We're going over a rant, not about things I dislike, but what the reason I love this game and why it's actually so much smarter, shows so much more wisdom than the other RTS titles that are coming out in around the same vein that completely miss the point as to why the genre became popular in the first place, what people enjoy about it. So multiplayer, I thought when I clicked multiplayer, it was going to be like, all right, peasant, 1v1 ranked, go. Timer has been started immediately. Go for it. By the way, if the computer crashes, I'm really sorry. We'll have to parse some things together. But so when I clicked it, I was blown away. I was like, this is so intelligent. The brain of the developer to do this, of the developers of the team, is so massive. You know that chair where the brain is sitting down, like, yes, my brain's so big I sit on it, smug with some tea. Yes, so. This is the brilliance of multiplayer. For those of you who don't know, I've got it right here. Multiplayer, remember what I said about primacy of learning? The first thing you see gives you an indication as to what the style of the game is. How seriously does it take itself? Are you the audience for this game? And it says, join public lobby. It just shows a lobby of all the games you could join immediately. This is another one of those things that StarCraft 2, again, I understand why it did it. Its focus was on how do we make an esport of an RTS with modern controls. It was trying to solve that problem. A lot of these other RTS games don't understand that that's the problem that StarCraft 2 was trying to solve, that was its niche, its marketing gimmick, what it was playing for. And so they don't have this very thing. They don't have, here's just a box that shows all the games that are open right now, the number of, like the name of the map, the number of players that it can have, the number of players that are in it right now, and you just join. And you know what's brilliant when you join? I haven't even talked about this, but when you join a game, it shows your name, your ping, and then, like an afterthought, it shows your rating. It cares so little about your rating. It's not focusing 1v1. So I'm like, oh, that's kind of strange, because joining the lobbies, like, that's not joining 1v1. Even then, that would be joining customs, but people don't do that. They just play ranked, And then the next thing you could do, you're like, okay, surely the next thing is ranked. Oh, you knew it's just one Russian guy alone working on this game? Yeah, I've heard something like that. It does not surprise me, because the thing I want to stress here, Torch just said, it's just one Russian guy alone working on this game. I want to stress that the Scouring has such a cohesive vision that it doesn't surprise me. There is part of the soul that I talk about in those older RTS games and those older titles, those older video games. You might think, well, people have more money and there's more design expertise now and people know so much more. Why can't they make less? Or why can't they make more? It's the Mythical Man Month idea, right? It's the chefs in the kitchen idea. Right? And here's what I mean by that is that you think if there's one master chef that you can make an amazing dish. Well, then obviously if we have 10 master chefs in the same kitchen, we could make a dish that's 10 times as good. But what you lose there is the creative control. You lose the vision. You lose the idea of what the restaurant is, what the kitchen is. So it does not surprise me that something as cohesive and put together as this is just from one developer who's super invested with the community. Right? Thank you so much, Torch, by the way. So you can join a public lobby just on the screen. What's after that? Create public lobbies, not create private lobbies, not create 1v1 grind set sessions offline where you and another person are just hammering the build orders all day and just fucking nailing it over and over. No, public lobby. Again, the game is trying to encourage you. If you're gonna play the game, join an existing game. If you're not going to join an existing game, because this is also good player funneling, then we're going to create a public lobby. And all of this is just so smart from being a noob friendly idea. We'll rope it in together because people see that there's ranked and that there's not ranked. And unranked is just kind of treated as like the bastard second child of RTS games in the last 15 years or so. And this game understands that that's incredibly off-putting to the casual player base, right? and for a host of reasons. And then after that, after create public lobbies, if you want it, you can create private lobbies where it's just you and your friends. And then I guess under that, kind of next to the back button at the bottom, is ranked. And what's brilliant about this is again, the most invested people, the people who want to play ranked, want to play 1v1, want to improve, really care about plumbing the depths of the mechanics. They're asking things like, what's the mining rate? How do units interact with one another? What's the right strategy on this map? They're gonna find the ranked button, just like they're gonna find the replay button. But it's okay that it's off-putting to them because they're so invested, they don't care. They're going to go in, they've got that competitive mindset. They're going to find the information that they want, but this keeps it out of view and out of focus and out of primacy over. Yes. And then ranked, kind of. We'll get to your point, Torch. I'm not ignoring you, but I am going to get to that and explain why I think he's doing a really good job. So again, this whole structure, the UI, this is how this guy must have like a mega brain for this, or he might just have stumbled on his natural talent and capacity. He did say in an interview that he wanted to make an RTS because he wanted it to be hard on himself. I think he needs to pick something harder next time because he fucking nailed this one. He smashed it out of the boat. So the game de-emphasizes ranked. I showed you menu-wise how it de-emphasizes ranked, but again, just stretch. Team games are the easiest thing to find. And yes, although this is embarrassing to a lot of these new RTS games, I've heard from so many other RTS games. Sometimes the community, sometimes the developers, usually the defense of the community, or people who are very public facing but not official. I'll leave it there. If you know what I mean, you know what I mean. They'll say, well, these new games, and no, I'm not just picking on any one game. I've heard this for half a dozen, literally, other games. Well, actually, you see, guys, 1v1 was not prioritized in this game. It just so happens that they made 1v1 and a ranked ladder with a ranked distribution and all of this. But don't worry, guys, 1v1 wasn't focused. It was just the first thing that you had to make in order for the game to actually play. The Scouring fucking destroys that logic because team games are the easiest thing to find, the easiest thing to create, are emphasized even by the tutorialization of the UI. And this is in complete opposition to StarCraft 2 and its spiritual successors. I've been saying this now for years, that RTS games need to do what the Scouring has done. What the Scouring has done is shown what I have always believed, which is we don't need more spiritual successors. I don't need people who don't understand a soul or a ghost or the creative spirit or are having to pin it down in design documents to fully understand it, right? It's not just inside of themselves as players and as human beings. I don't need to hear from them how they want to make a spiritual successor, like they want to give birth to some Frankensteinian monster that kind of speaks like it's a good idea in a boardroom to someone, or it looks pretty good on a piece of paper, or it fulfills what I've called designer brain, which is where, if everyone fits inside my mental model, all of the brain pieces go like this, and it doesn't congeal, it snaps like a perfect puzzle, but it just makes a congealed mess, right? So this is not what I've been saying is we don't need spiritual successors. We actually need a physical predecessor. That's why the RTS genre's future is in its roots. Player ranks are not emphasized. Something that bothered me, because again, I was trapped in the StarCraft mind virus myself, is when you play a game, even when you play ranked, there's no APM in the replays. And here's the thing, if the developer watches this, I would personally like APM to be in the replays or in the description box at the end of a game for ranked only. I think it should absolutely be scrubbed, removed, and not allowed in terms of team games or FFA or anything like that, right? You give people stats so they can point to a number and say, that makes sense. But as soon as you show APM, that's not a term a lot of casual, some even journeyman getting to intermediate players understand. You're immediately emphasizing them. Yeah, here's another example from Torch. APM should just be toggle on off. I would emphasize that. Put this in the options, default it to off. No casual player knows who's not indoctrinated into RTS games. They don't know what the hell APM is. And explaining what APM is just makes them see how big the mountain is. And actually, They thought they were just sightseeing on a nice road, and you've accidentally shown them this mountain, and you've pointed it at them and told them they must climb it because the best view is up there. But if they don't, they're a scrub and they need to get good, and they'll never get away from that mental hurdle that you're putting on them. Because again, primacy of knowledge. Also, it's frankly, APM is basically the RTS genre's equivalent of a cognito hazard. If you've not heard of this idea, it's made by Ray Kurzweil and Nick Bostrom and a couple of other people like this. A cognito hazard, more popularized by things like the SCP Foundation. A cognito hazard is a thing that is actively harmful and dangerous to you because you perceive it, you have the ability to comprehend it, and it causes damage to you. In this case, I think APM is a cognito hazard. It takes a casual person and immediately thrusts a worldview on them that they're not equipped to handle, they haven't actually asked for, and you're forcing this mentality of a competitive 1v1 grind set upon them that they don't actually, like, as soon as they start looking up that term, it brings them up into a sea, a web, a wave of knowledge that they're not ready for and that they're not looking for, right? This is the same thing as like trying to get a person into a fighting game. And you're like, so anyways, if we're playing Tekken, here's the technique for Korean backdash. You're going to have to practice that for like 2 hours until you can do it. And then you have to be able to do it on a command. And then I can show you how the medium converts into this wall combo. It's like, dude, they just want to see a button that sparks and sends the dude on the ground, right? So I would love to see APM, but toggle it off. The fact that it's not in by default, I think is a default inclusion is a very intelligent decision. Yeah, we're 25 minutes in. I've only gotten to this section. We have all this to go, so this is going to be great. Here's the other thing that makes this game, again, appear noob-friendly. It's very easy to teach. Now, my home game is another title, right? Is Little War Game, right? And it is called that because it's got kind of the same mechanics as StarCraft 2, but it has the same idea of like we're going to have fewer units and we're going to make the interactions a little simpler. The TTK, the time to kill, is going to be a little higher. It's going to take more time. This game is easier to teach than Little War Game. And if the people from my community watch this, they're going to be aghast and we're like, Atano, how could you? You've been doing stuff for that game for on and off for like 11 years. How dare you? This is the easiest RTS game to teach. This is actually like so simple. I have a friend. He's wanted to play RTS games for a long time. He's asked me about some of these other RTS titles, like, should I learn it? And I know what his APM levels are. I know what his skill threshold is. I know that he's capable of learning games based on these other games that he's played. But frankly, if we were to put him, I would suspect if we were to put him, yeah, it's the potions mechanics. Yeah, Torch, you're absolutely right. I will get to that. But if we were to take my friend and try and teach him StarCraft 2, there was a video that came out. I forget who made it. It was very intelligent. It said something that the RTS community needed to hear, which is that if you don't play StarCraft 2, if you don't play RTS games and that's your first one, the people who say, oh, just play ranked, it's super fun, it will literally take you a month of playing, probably 5 days a week, if not every day, for multiple hours for you to escape bronze. Now, I know you're thinking like, oh, but bronze is for scrubs and really bad people. Like, you could do anything and get out of bronze. Like, I saw a grandmaster play with his foot and he massed SCVs to kill someone in bronze. It's like, yeah, but because that is a lot of legacy skill that you're taking for granted, and you're actually so far up on the mountain that you cannot see the plateaus that you hit and then had to climb. You have forgotten that you once upon a time did not know that 2 + 2 is 4. Right, you are, to use a phrase that I think Thorin uses it. Actually, it's pretty smart. I don't know where he got it, but I love hearing it. Is that you're a fish who forgot that you're in water? You're like, why don't you just swim up to a tree? And it's like, you can't do that because those players aren't in water. You just dumped them as a human being in the air, and now you're wondering why they can't swim to the top of the tree, right? Well, without the APM, you can't play modern RTS. No, exactly, Dr. Wumpus. But here's the thing about the Scouring. This is why I said it appears new player friendly. Okay, let me explain how it's easy to teach. But basically, the Scouring, what's brilliant about it is it puts on all of these layers and conceits and deliberately makes itself look very new player friendly, has an insane level of mechanical depth that is beyond the understanding of most people. And that's fine. They're not looking for that. It's super fine. So here's what's easy to teach. Again, my friend would probably be like a month to get out of bronze, would take some serious effort. He doesn't know about putting things in hotkeys or in control groups. He doesn't use hotkeys. He doesn't know how to put things in control groups. He's never shift-clicked anything in his entire life. I'm saying this so that you legacy RTS people who know that I know what I'm talking about understand like where this guy is on the skill progression. This is the first game I said, and this is first even before Little War Game, even before my home game, that I said, yeah, actually, you should play this game. This is it. This is the easiest RTS to get you into the genre. Not the easiest in terms of there's the least to do. Yeah, exactly, Dr. Wumpus. Dr. Wumpus in the chat says, sounds like where I am nowadays. Yeah, this is part of why this is such a successful game. Look at what I'm saying here. There's 2 resources, and they're not some weird thing like, oh, it's like the Tiberium from Command and Conquer, and it's also like ethereal space crystals that you like have a scout that meanders about. And it's not like Age of Empires 2 where there's like 5 different resources. No, there's 2 resources, super intelligible, understandable, right? I can explain them right now. Resource 1, gold, the primary resource. Okay, sick. Resource 2, lumber. Now, how do you get lumber? How do you get gold? You send workers to mine the gold. How do you get workers to mine lumber? They go, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I can't get iron, gold, wood, gems, and gas. In this one, it's just gold and lumber. You take workers, you send them to mine the tree. And you know what? Perfectly intuitive to my friend who is not familiar with RTS games in the slightest, that after a while of hitting the lumber, hitting the tree, it goes away. That just, he didn't even question it. It wasn't like, Tiberium, where it's like, how does Tiberium grow or not grow in Command and Conquer? No, super easy. There is only one other resource, right? So there's 2 resources, gold, lumber. The only other thing you have to think about is the supply mechanic of the game, which is called food. I'll get into this because it deserves its own separate section, but the Scouring's implementation on food is exactly the casual-friendly version of making supply depots, building overlords in StarCraft 2 that you actually need for casual players. How many factions are there? 2. Now, you might say that they're like Warcraft 2 factions because they're almost exactly the same, but there's only minor differences between some of the units. That's what casual players want. Like, I can't stress this enough. They don't want, you cannot tell someone who's never put a puzzle together. Like, you can't take a 3-year-old and say, I love building puzzles. You're going to have the best time building puzzles. Puzzles are sick. I learned so much in my life about building puzzles. Like, pattern recognition is so easy to me now. Here you go, little Timmy. And I'm using the Magic the Gathering Timmy example here on purpose. But, here's your like 3-year-old Timmy. All right, Timmy, I'm going to give you a Thomas Kincaid 5,000 piece 3-dimensional puzzle. Here you go, peasant. I'm not going to give you some easy thing like Dora the Explorer 10 piece or something like. No, we're going to give you a hard one because that way any of the skill you gain is real skill. And it's like, yeah, but Timmy, as the 3-year-old, has not bought into the conceit of puzzles, doesn't know whether or not they like puzzles, and might actually decide to go play with brios or crawl around on the floor instead, right? So Torch says lumber, it can be a big finicky because there isn't just one big force we can send workers to get them. You can periodically rearrange where they gather or you'll be disadvantaged. I mean, so here's the thing, Torch, and I know what you're saying. New players don't care about that. They literally don't care. And actually, this is part of the Scouring's appeal. We're going to get to this, is that things like having an effect on terrain, building giant buildings, making it feel like a big fucking empire. These are things that casual players want. Look at They Are Billions, right? I don't know why there were so many RTS games that were so focused on PvP, and they looked at They Are Billions and they're like, people seem to really like this like SimCity crafting tower defense mechanic, and they really actually enjoy like the building aspect of the game. They seem to like it when they have like a big fortressy like area. Now, fuck that. We're not going to pay attention to that at all, but the Scouring did. The Scouring does. So there's only 2 resources. There's only one gameplay soft resource you have to pay attention to, right? There's only 4 army units per faction. Dr. Wumpus, I want you to get your head wrapped around this. He's in the chat right now for those of you who are on YouTube later. I want you to get your head around this. This game has 4 army units per faction, and they are almost exactly the same. Now, I know someone's going to say, like, actually, Knights and Munchers aren't comparable right now. Okay, calm yourself. Non-army unit, only non-army unit you can build is a worker. It's called something different for both factions. It's a worker. It's a peasant, right? It's something like that. You can build a default melee unit. You can build an archer equivalent, right? You can build a cannon. Cannon, probably one of the most skill expressive units I've ever seen in an RTS, yet also so intuitive and also punishes micro and misplay while also rewarding. It's just such a good unit. And then the 4th unit is the faction unique one. It is Munchers for the orcs, and it is Knights for the humans, right? There you go. That's it. Those are all the units. So 2 resources, 2 factions, 4 army units. Now, I know all of the experienced players right now are up in arms. They're like, wait a second, how can it possibly be that you're saying that this game has so much mechanical depth? There aren't even enough units to have mechanical depth. Okay, just to, again, I can't speak to the level of literal pros, but to put this in your perspective, I know that there are, in addition to myself, multiple people who have reached Masters Plus tier inside of StarCraft 2 who are playing the Scouring, and they have nope, I didn't forget cannons. Like I said, there's the melee unit, the archer, the cannon, and then there is either the knight or the muncher, depending on what unit you have, like what side you have, right? So I promise you that at that level, at the level of like where I'm sitting at roughly 200 APM, there is plenty of shit for me to do that nevertheless hides its mechanical depth away from casual players. Which is, again, like, I know that sounds crazy if you're coming from a StarCraft perspective. So there's only 4 army units, very teachable, right? But what unit do I make in this scenario? Well, rather than have you go down, like, these 16 civilizations, 4 of which are meta, and then these are the builds that you should have, and then these are the units that are good, and these are trap units. No, there's just 4 units. That's it. If you can't solve your problem with 4 army units, then I've got bad news for you. You're fucked, because there's only 4 army units, but there's so much to do with them that it's still fun, even though it appears new friendly. And then there's 11 buildings. Now, I know you're like, wait, how the fuck are there 11 buildings, but there's only 2 resources, 2 factions, and 4 army units? Oh, surely there's 5 for this one, and then 5 for the other one. Like, surely that's what's happening. No. There's not. There's 11 buildings, and I've got them broken down right here. And the reason, now you might think if you're from like Sins of a Solar Empire or the Age series or Command and Conquer, not Command and Conquer, Company of Heroes, you might think that 11 buildings is nothing. But even the 11 buildings are actually simpler than they look here. So look at this. There's a main building, and that could be upgraded twice. That's 3 of your 11 buildings right there. There is 1 supply structure. It's the thing that feeds food. It's the farm, right? This is kind of a thing that has been common throughout RTS games. I really like farms and food because it reminds me of Tooth and Tail, but, you know, we'll be fine. It has 2 buildings that produce army units. Makes sense because there's only 4 of them, right? Makes sense because there's only 4 of them. So 3 of your units can be upgraded in your barracks or barracks equivalent, and 1 of them could be upgraded, can be generated in your forge equivalent, right? Typically, the grunt melee attacker, right? The soldier, the archer, and the specialty unit for your faction can be built inside of your barracks or barracks equivalent, and then the 1 extra unit, the cannon, can be built in a forge. Okay. Army upgrades. A lot of the buildings, rather than have like, oh, but we're going to make sure that there's like so much skill expression because we're going to make sure that there's separate upgrades and all these things that you have to manage and tackle on at the exact same time. Overwhelmingly, 3 of these buildings, they serve other purposes in game, but the biggest purpose that they have is that they actually gate your units. Right? Oh, you want to build archers? Well, you have to build this unit, this building in order to do that. You want to build your faction-specific unit? You have to build this building in order to do it. Oh, you want to get an upgrade for your muncher, right? For the orcs? Well, you have to build this separate building in order to do that. And does the building do anything else? Does it make new unit? Nope. It's just a prerequisite, and it has the upgrade so that you can update it. And then it has 2 defensive buildings. Although, here's another thing that makes this game incredibly casual friendly, is that this is brilliant. I would compare this to the brilliance of Stormgate's sentry post for the Vanguard faction. That's actually the praise I want to give to this, because everyone is really loving that. For anyone who doesn't know, in Stormgate, the Vanguard faction, one of the 3 factions in the game, has a default ranged bunker that auto attacks and does some pittance of damage, and depending on what infantry style unit you put inside of it, that bunker gains different properties, right? It becomes like a bouncing chainsaw, or it gains a long range artillery style cannon, or it heals all units around it that are biological, or it heals the mechanical units that are around it, etc. The defensive buildings in this game are brilliant because there are 2 explicit defensive buildings, right? And they're exactly what new players want. Because again, what do old RTS players want? Ignore what you've heard for the last 15 years. Before 2010, what did RTS players want? Age of Empires has nailed this. They want to build big fucking towers, and they want to have a giant fucking wall. They want to know that this is their kingdom. Why do you think Manor Lords is stacking up and doing so well? And that's exactly what this game has. It has what the casual player wants or thinks they want. It has a barricade, right, that has little like wood brought up like this that blocks, intrusion. And then it also has the ability for you to make a guard tower. But the thing that's brilliant about this, and this is the part that I think is actually brilliant, not just the defensive fortifications, is that in the Scouring, what is a big problem new players have in RTS games? I can tell you right now, because it feeds into my next point, they hate getting rushed. Now, here's the problem with that. What Torch, you're online right now, right? You sound like you're capable at this game or RTS games generally. What I, as a more experienced, I would say like advanced RTS player, not expert, but like advanced level RTS player, what I consider being rushed is a very specific time with a very specific focus on aggression versus your economy, etc. But I've seen a lot of more casual RTS players because I played a lot of games, tried to compete in some of them, just watched a bunch of replays and did some cast and analyses across multiple games, Little War Game, Guardians of Atlas, Tooth and Tail, like to go on and on, to say nothing of some of these newer games that are in the cycle of games we're talking about that I think the Scouring is beating the shit out of right now. And new players don't have that conception of being rushed. The new player conception of getting rushed is, I don't care that it has been 6 minutes in-game time in StarCraft 2. I just got the tech for, I don't know, I just got my first 4 Hydralisks out, and this asshole comes over and kills me. Now, I don't think that that's a rush, but those new players do feel, those casual players do feel, those journeyman, beginner level players, rookie players do feel that that is something that's hurting them. And this is why the defensive buildings are so sick, because there's more defensive buildings than I told you about. I almost lied. And here's why. The top of a barracks has a platform. Yeah, 2-minute spawn Zerg rush, exactly. Right, Dr. Wumpus says, like, 2-minute Zerg rush is to me what a rush is, right? Something like that, even faster than that, even. Here's what's brilliant. Not just the fortification, the barricade, and not just the guard tower, the defensive structure that you really use a lot of every game are things like the barracks. The barracks has a platform on the top of it, and you can put ranged units that you build inside of that for defender's advantage. Whereas if I'm playing some other games, right, I'm going to have like, I have 2 archers. If I'm playing Little War Game, and again, I love Little War Game. I've put in a lot of heart and soul into that game. But if in Little War Game, I have 1 archer and you attack me with 2 archers and I have nothing else, I have to pull my workers to help attack and defend. Right? That's a bit stressful for me. You have a lot of micro counterplay and interaction here, right? This is very painful for me. The thing, or let's say I have one, here's a better example. I have an archer and you have a soldier. I have to like attack with the archer, move, 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 put all my workers in front of my archer so he can go pew, 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 right? This is the stretch, right? Oh, dude, Torch, I've definitely seen it. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, they just rush, build a barracks and then get the upgrade. That's defensive fortification and then go. But here's what's really cool about the Scouring is that platform, whereas in Little War Game, again, game I love, think is super cool, does a lot of things right. I have to use extra APM if I do the correct choice of making a ranged unit first, right? People in the Little War Game community will jump me for that because there's more nuance than I'm giving here. But that's not the point. The point is that you understand. And so in the Scouring, I can just take my archers and put them on top of my barracks. And actually, one thing you discover in ranked or in a lot of casual games like Team FFA, etc., is that people have a lot of guard towers and barracks and they shove all their archers up there and it makes it very hard to kill them. And this is actually sick because I discovered this game after I made the video that's on the channel with Hupsion or Rail Stormgate, where I said that basically RTSs need strong defender's advantage. They need good AoE and good defender's advantage because that stretches the gamut, that runs the gamut of economy versus aggression, right? If you don't have strong defensive options, then aggression is too powerful. But if you don't have strong AoE, you can't break strong defensive fortifications. And if you have good AoE, it makes it easier to defend locations, which means that players can be riskier and choose to expand past you, right? Now, this is really, really cool because it basically gives more outs. And again, it appears new player friendly. Torch is in the chat right now giving the context that I am definitely going to go into when we talk about how the units are both casual and hardcore below here. But remember what I said. Okay, if you've never played the Scouring, here's something super cool the Scouring does. It's not just a bunch of kind of wonky maps, like early RTS style looking maps that are a bit imbalanced in some ways and have this team slash FFA focus, right? Free for all focus. They have this cool thing called camps. They have creeps. Now, I know if you've been part of the RTS community for the last couple of years, the conversation as to, hey, what the hell happened to Warcraft 3 camps is alive and well. It's percolating inside of your brain. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And the way that they do in the Scouring is really interesting. The Scouring has a day-night mechanic. During the day, sometimes bandits, these neutral enemies, will come out of the woodwork, sometimes literally, and go to attack your workers, right? But actually, at night, skeletons come up literally off the map or out of the ground to come and attack you in waves. You see like enemy undead ranged units come out and attack. Wolves will come out in packs and go and attack you. And you might say, how the hell is that casual friendly? How is it casual friendly that they're playing in tower defense? To which I say, much like how Warcraft 3 was a real-time strategy game, but it was an RPG RTS, right? To use Grubby's terminology, Warcraft 3 focuses on the RPG mechanics, the growth of stats, the power of heroes, the use of items, right? This is a tower defense RTS. And the reason that that's good is, one, frankly, tower defense as a genre is part of RTS and is what a lot of new players want in an RTS game, right? Whereas myself and Torsh and other more like experienced players, we might see RTSs as like the combination of your economy versus your aggression versus your information and a series of calculated plays along with strong mechanical components that like determine who is more adept at executing their plan on this axis of aggression versus economy, right? And that kind of scaling, and it's all very much so more calculated. A more inexperienced player, I told you, they want to build big fucking walls and they want to have towers. And there's no point in having towers if a strong player never attacks you. Worst thing that I've seen in some casual RTS games, new player really doesn't want to die. They build a defensive structure. They're playing against someone who's a bit, more intermediate in skill. You know what happens if you're an RTS player, if you're the intermediate person? You literally laugh. Don't ever attack into that one defined defensive fortification. Go expand through the rest of the map or make a bunch of stuff, come back later and stomp them because they just sacrificed their economy for safety. So what I'm getting at is you need something to make the towers and walls feel good and not be a terrible decision. Now, they might still be a suboptimal decision, but if you're getting attacked by skeletons who are giving you gold for everyone you kill, by the way, and can be a real threat to your economy, if you're killing wolves who are roving in packs and are pretty beefy, it actually makes the more casual, the more new player feel good. They're getting rewarded for their instinct rather than the game punishing them for their instinct. You build a defensive fortification. Get fucked, loser. You're about to get ruined economically. It's going to be over for you. The game rewards this new player sensation, this desire to build a city sim. And as Torch correctly points out, every time that they do that, not only is their natural inclination to, I don't want to die, which is very reasonable because, again, new players are operating with very little knowledge. They have comparatively less skill and they know it, and they don't want to lose. So the easiest way to not lose immediately is to build defensively. The game rewards that idea. It gives you something. And here's the thing. Now, you might think again, well, that doesn't matter. Like creeps just attack. That's just like a macro mechanic that comes from the game instead of you just like jamming the mule button over and over as Terran or Chrono Boost for Protoss or the like. Like that's just an out of base macro mechanic. It's fucking brilliant because here's the biggest part. Myself and a new player are playing, right? Well, I'm still new at this game, but like, I mean, newer to RTS player. Like the poor guy I just played on ranked recently. We're both playing, right? I have expanded more than they have. When nighttime comes, I have more places I have to defend than they do. Now, I could get more money than they do, but I have more bases I have to defend. My attention is being stretched in greater degrees than theirs. And let's say that I say, fuck it. I don't care about this. The creeps are just an out-of-base macro mechanic. I'm going to go kill my opponent. Here's the problem with that. because of the way that these creep camps spawn, not only are there static camps around the map that inhibit this movement, are going to slow down the A move pace of the game, right? Are going to unknowingly buy more time for my opponent. I have here as a note, it's kind of like when you play 1v1 Risk. When you play 1v1 Risk, according to the rules of the game, there is a neutral faction and they store all of their units in this neutral area. And this clever dance happens where 1v1 Risk actually can be a bit coin flippy and feel a bit raw. But because there's a neutral faction, there's something impeding the stronger player from bowling over the weaker player immediately. This is something most RTS games don't have. And so what happens is if I take okay, whatever, how's this deal with creeps? Like I just take some time, I A move across the map, I destroy more and more and more and more and more of the stuff, and I get over to their base. But if it's nighttime, and the game is very fair, it operates on 8 hours of day, 8 minutes of day, 8 minutes of night, or something like that, right? If I do that, while I'm attacking them, let's think about the order, right? Here's their base, right? Here's their base right here. I'm attacking here. Okay, here's their base. I'm attacking here. Behind me, all of the creeps are spawning. Behind me, I am fighting a fight on two fronts. I am fighting against the very strong defensive fortifications that the game encourages them to build anyways, that their natural inclination as a newer player is to build anyways, that the game is rewarding them for doing. I have to fight that. It's a more technical fight to attack than to defend in the Scouring, which I love. I think it's brilliant. But I'm also now attacking creeps that are behind me. And unless I have overwhelming, like truly dominant levels of force, because I have to get through a very strong front line, and I have to defend against basically infinite free reinforcements from my opponent behind me, and I have to defend my base back at home while I'm pursuing this siege, pursuing this attack. So actually, the night creeps help new players the most. They are the neutral army inside of Risk. They give the extra time and context for those players without holding their hand, without saying like, here's an assistant that will make units for you and pre-locate gold. And actually, I don't know how we would make that fair and ranked. Maybe we'll just make it different based on the various rank levels. No, every player is subject to this. Every player has access to this gold, and every player now knows the risk of attacking at night. And the best part about this is that by the time you can actually attack for the first day in the Scouring, if you're doing like a more meta strat, I think you have 5 or 6 archers, right? If you're not doing a more meta strat, you might have just gotten to tier 2 or something like that, barring like a complete like rush with a building and trying to kill your opponent immediately. So by the time you have enough forces that it's like, well, I've probably got a better opening like build order than they do. I'll just go scout and kill them. One, the creeps will slow you going across the map even as you clear them and get more reward. You won't immediately win. And then 2, as night comes, it turns out actually your 6 to 8 archers are not going to be enough to kill an opponent who has any level of defense, right? Comparable to your skill level, or maybe even a bit below your skill level. So creeps are brilliant. Camps are well done. They give this extra source of income to give you an extra way of showing your aggression. It gives you more build diversity inside of the game, right? It mitigates rushes from stronger players to weaker or more defensive players. This opens up more defensive options. It encourages this like SimCity tower defense style of this RTS. And it leads to the natural inclination of players, and it doesn't hold the player's hand. A lot of these new RTS games, they're almost insulting in the way that they like make static defense like, oh, but static defense is pretty good, but only in these defined spots and only against these specific rushes. And actually, if you do it outside of that, you're just curb stomping yourself out of the game. Whereas this game is more like, there's a right thing to do and a wrong thing to do, but we're helping you. Yeah, Dr. Wumpus, it's exactly what you said. Basically, camps are offering up the yellow paint in a way that is not offensive. We're not talking like incredible. We're not talking yellow paint for people who can't figure out that they have to climb the wall. It's more like creeps are more like when you play Portal 2 and the lighting when you go to the underground part of the level right after you beat GLaDOS the first time, and the lighting indicates where you should go, but it doesn't tell you where to go. It just has things like the grate has some textures that are focused around it to make you want to look there, right? Or maybe it's things like the lighting is like there's a flickering light out in the distance that kind of indicates to go. Yeah, exactly. So here's the thing too. I have talked at length It's been 53 minutes. I've been talking about all the things that this game does right. And yet I'm a more experienced, I'm an advanced level to my own like methodology, my own way of defining it. I'm an advanced level player, but I'm saying that this game is actually just good. Like, surely this is just some like farming simulator for Clash of Clans people who accidentally like tripped over a mouse and keyboard for the first time. This can't actually be a good game. Wrong. Wrong, because this is the thing that again, StarCraft 2 ruined for everybody, for all the new RTS games, right? Because, again, they had a reason for doing it. StarCraft 2 is trying to solve the problem of how do we have a game with more modern controls and a more tightly wound engine that has these conveniences and yet still have an interesting game. And a lot of these new RTSs are not considering that, don't have that mentality. I don't think ever sat back and looked at what is the fundamental presupposition that generated it. They, like the Shrek movie, just took it on board. And here's what I mean by that. StarCraft 2 has a lot of units, and especially Protoss, has a lot of units with a lot of abilities, right? If you didn't know what APM is, boy, you're going to fucking learn what APM is, because we're going to have 2 or 3 activated abilities on everything, or it's going to be a unit like the Adept, where how you use it when you activate an ability, it can be both APM intensive and heavy on your decision making at the same time. We are going to overwhelm you, because that's the design solution they came up with in StarCraft 2. We're going to overwhelm you with all of the decisions you have to make and the things you mechanically have to do, because that's the way that we think that we can make the game better. For anyone who played a lot of StarCraft 2 early, watch those initial casts and the battle reports, the phrase terrible damage lives inside of your mind rent free, because that was the idea. There's going to be so much happening, and then stuff is going to explode, and it's going to be like an orgiastic mess of violence, right? And things happening almost like chaotically. And yet this game has so much depth, and it's only done it with 4 units. How is that? So let's, first off, the fact that it has a few abilities is not the problem. It is never, this is a problem that some of the more Command and Conquer inspired games, right? To my opinion, Company of Heroes also has this. It is not about the number of abilities. It's not about the quantity. It's about the quality and about how much more advantage you can get over your opponent. Right? That is what a high level player wants. They don't want to be in cookie clicker, and if they click 10 times a second and they would practice that, then all of their units get like 1% increase. No, what they want actually is something like Blink from StarCraft 2, where being better at your opponent at blinking is a skill, or the control of High Templar. Something where if you are that much better than your opponent, you can smash them with that skill, and the skill expands, and that's exactly what the Scouring does well. And the reason this is good is, again, think about the presentation to a newer player, more casual player. Well, I mean, the Archer doesn't even have an ability, so, like, it's not a hard unit to use. Meanwhile, any strong player will tell you, Archers are incredibly taxing on your APM and on your focus fire, and require a lot of attention so that you don't just lose them in silly, stupid fashion, but have huge amounts of DPS if that can be leveled, right? Well, the cannon's pretty simple. I just point the cannon in a direction and it blows stuff up. The one upgrade that the cannon has, I think the only unit that has 2 abilities, and what is its ability? It can go into a turret mode and fire a single shot up in the air that can hit an area at greater range on a short cooldown. Yes. So if you're a more mechanical player, you have these kiting archers that you have to maneuver. Yes, a newer player can worry about the positioning of their cannons, but a really good player can focus on, hey, I see that there's units over there attacking me that I can't see, or I can't reach that fortification. I'm going to spam click the mortar to hit into that location, and it won't be exact, but we'll get some damage done, and then I'll reposition because I have to do that again in a few seconds, right? Yes, Dr. Wumpus. Like, here's the thing, Torch. The artillery ability, you're correct. It does have to be repeatedly assigned, but it's perfect because a more casual player is getting value out of the cannons because it positions and does damage like this in an area, like in a line down. Whereas a more experienced player is doing what Dr. Wumpus is saying, like taking advantage of what the siege engine was in StarCraft Brood War. Like, a few abilities. Here's the hidden depth on abilities, what we're talking about. So Muncher Rage, right? Munchers, this like ogre bastardized looking thing that the orcs can make. They're equivalent of the knights, right? They have an ability where if they click the ability on a unit, it gets like double damage for a period of time, but it can't target itself. So what unit do you target? Now you might say it's just like, oh, just spam click it on all of the munchers. Are you sure you don't want to put it on the archers who have insane DPS? Well, put it on the cannons. Well, you can't put it on the cannons. The cooldown is pretty long as well, actually. So who do you put it on? Again, now you might think that this is an APM tax, like, oh, I would just want to auto cast all of those abilities. Then you're taking away you've given so much to the casual player. You now have to give some hidden depth, some meaningful play to the more experienced player. Archer kiting. Archers are pretty responsive in this game. They fire their attack point, the point at which after they fire their shot that you can move them again, is very good. They can actually do things like kite wolves. You can mess around with the leash range of other units. It's very important to get them out on the map early, but they have 60 hit points. They're pretty low health units, so lots of DPS, but again, there's creeps all over the map. You have to pay attention to where you position them matters, especially for big fights, because they get cleaved and destroyed to shit by cannons at any interaction. There's some heavy melee, like tier 3 units equivalents that they don't really want to fight, but they have so much potential if you could just control them well, right? Cannon positioning and target fire, we talked about that. The cannon cannot move while it is, it cannot attack while it's moving. It's actually worse than the siege tank in that way. It cannot, imagine a siege tank from Brood War, except it can't attack when it's in normal mode, but it can attack with a giant AoE arc, like bam, when it is actually deployed, and it's a triangle at range, and it has pretty good range, and actually its damage is such that 2 of those overlapping on an area, wrecking archers, destroying stuff. You get them behind workers, wrecking them as well. You put them on top of those defensive towers that I told you about. You put them on top of a barracks, on top of a guard tower. Oh, wait, they now have range and you don't have to aim them. So they're really good defensively, but you have to struggle to use them offensively. But they have a repeatable spam castable ability that is limited by your APM and by your own personal attention, right? Unit selection limits. One of the things that made me realize that the developer of this game was a fucking rolling Chad was, again, this is something that was ruined because of StarCraft 2. Again, this is something that was ruined because for anyone who doesn't know, way back in 2008, 2009, Brood War is super big. There's this kerfuffle happening over in South Korea, and StarCraft 2 is coming out. And what do people argue about? There's 2 big things they argue about in South Korea and TeamLiquid.net, etc. Right? When they're not talking about the graphics of StarCraft 2, they're talking about a thing that we have not solved to this day in the RTS community. And it's 2 things. One, we won't mention too much more. It's multiple building select. You can select an unlimited number of buildings and get them to control things. You actually make so few buildings inside of the Scouring if you're macroing somewhat well. Even if you're not macroing well, I think I had at most like 7 buildings that weren't main structures, building units. So that's not a problem. But unlimited unit selection. And this game just decides, you know what? Fuck that. Because ever since StarCraft 2, people have said, well, we have unlimited unit selection. And really, actually, all those people who had limited unit selection in Brood War and Warcraft 2 and Warcraft 3, they're just old fogies. Like, they didn't have the technology to actually have unlimited unit selection. That's why they did that. And that's not actually, no, I like that. Nice. Want to say hi? Cool. So the unlimited unit selection was just something, yeah, in a sec. Yep. The unlimited unit selection was something that a lot of people were like, hey, so, well, they just didn't have the technology. Wrong. We actually have interviews from that time, from Warcraft 3, from StarCraft Brood War, even from StarCraft 2, and developers and people who were making the game, where they talked about these ideas. The fact that actually they could have increased the selection size, and they deliberately didn't. For StarCraft 2, but they deliberately did for its predecessors. And do you know why they did that? Let me give you the TLDR of hours of reading that I did to find this out, and you can look it up too. They thought that if they made it so that you could select an unlimited number of units, it would lower the skillful play of the game. It would give too much of an advantage to attackers, right? And it would have problems with the pathing. But that even if it didn't have problems with the pathing, they didn't think that it made for a more stressful, frenetic, fun game to do that. It's not fun for everything to go well. It's actually bad for the defender. Why do you think being slightly behind is so bad in StarCraft 2 and has been ever since the beta? Is because if you can control everything, there's an excellent interview that was done between Thorin and Brown Bear, right? Thorin, the esports historian, that's his moniker. Brown Bear, a guy who writes on, I forget what his Slack is, not his Slack, but his writing prompt channel, and they talked about StarCraft 2 versus Brood War and what Brown Bear made an article that says StarCraft 2 and Brood War are different genres, and it's a provocative title. It's an interesting idea that went into it. One of the things that was said by Thorin is that he's a big fan of the player Naniwa, and he didn't like this idea in StarCraft 2 that players could just micro and win, but the micro doesn't matter as much. It's more like a hands-off keyboard moment. And the answer, the retort, the response, I guess you could say, both in writing and in the interview itself that Brown Bear gave, is that actually the mechanics of StarCraft 2 for macro are so simple in comparison. The mechanics in StarCraft 2 for macro were, to a professional player, so comparatively simple relative to something like a Brood War that actually there's no micro that you could do that in an even or reasonable engagement that would be worth you taking your foot off the gas. There's no excuse for not macroing more perfectly. And that actually is a thing here that I want to talk about with the unlimited unit selection. Because you can't grab every single unit on the map and attack it, you actually have to, fights take longer. The game takes longer. Oh, but you're fighting the game, not actually playing the game. That makes the game more defensive. That makes winning more fun. That makes every input that you have more reasonable. I think the unit cap is like 16 or 20 units, something like that. And I hope that doesn't change at all, because it actually creates a very different flavor and a very different vibe. You know why? I like that in the Scouring, and I imagine this is good for new players as well. I tried to just make a whole bunch of basic shit, use legacy skill, use my macro, generate a whole bunch of shit, A-move my opponent. It is actually more difficult to A-move your opponent when you have selection limits on the number of units that you have, when the units are physically bulky. This is what we're talking about when we talk about encouraging defense over offense, right? All of these things, this is how I know, even before Torch told me, that this is made, if not by one person, by a very limited team of designers and developers, one and the same probably, is that everything is just so cohesive. It just fits together perfectly, like grains of sand on an hourglass, but they're all colored and they always make the same image flipping both ways. And this all shows a vision of emphasizing defensive play. So, but here's the thing, if you're a more experienced player, that's good for you. You actually have more ability to outplay your opponent because you have more APM, because you can control more unit groups. It encourages you to think more tactically rather than, fuck this guy, I'm going to A-move them to death. It creates more interesting tactical decisions of, I'm going to send groups 1 and 2 over here and 3 and 4 over here, and then we're going to meet in the middle, smash them that way, right? We're going to multitask them on multiple fronts. That's good for a more experienced player because it gives you a lever of skill over your opponent that your opponent may not be able to combat. Here's the other thing. You might think like, oh, so I bet we're just going to go back to like individual unit selection, and we're going to go to individual unit selection. We don't have shifting, adding control groups. We don't have control groups in the slightest. We can't shift click. We can't like control click units to control them individually. None of that's the case. Control click works. Shift click to add works. Hotkeys work. They're in there natively. Control groups, yeah, they work as well, right? All of these, you want to patrol, they can patrol. You want to hold position, they've got hold position. Most of the conveniences that you expect from control that allow you to show your ability for small unit micro are in, without the thing that takes away a lot of that agency, which is all of your units deathballing and moving forward. We're going to get very close to the end here, and then I'm going to shut it down. Probably just send this over to from Twitch over to YouTube. But next thing I want to talk about is food. This is just a very quick point. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. I'd encourage you to play the Scouring demo so that you can see it for yourself. But basically, food is like supply in these other RTS games, except not made to fucking hate you every second that you play the game. And it also has a lot of skill. So the basic idea is one of the structures, that supply structure, you build the farm, right? You have this idea. Is it just a demo at the minute? Yeah, but I think they said that they want to try and release it at like June or something like that. I actually think the game is strong enough as an experience that you could play it now. I personally, yes, it's very playable. And I say that having played like probably a dozen and put in God knows how many hours into a lot of other games that I never made content for or talked about under pseudonyms and the like. This is very playable. So here's how the food mechanic works in the game. You have a certain number of units. The more units you have, the more they drain food from you per second. Now, if you make farms, every farm for each worker on farms gives you food per second. Now, it's something like when you make a farm, if one worker is on it, you get 60 food per increment, let's say. If there's 2 on there, there's 90. If there's 3, there's 120. Here's what's cool about that. Do you choose to play 2 farms and have 1 worker on each? Because that'll get you 120 food for only 2 workers. But if you need the food right now, then you might want to get 3 workers on there on 1 farm. That's 1 more worker, but you get the same value right now, right? That's really, really good in a different context. And why does food matter? Because if your food starts, I believe, at like 100 of 200. There's a value of 200. Perfect. Again, so smart, because it feeds into the idea of legacy RTS players who are going to love the depth of the food mechanic of 200 being the max supply, as it were. And the way food works is it takes the overall amount of food you're making from farms and subtracts the overall cost of the units that you have. And that number, that 100, that X of 200 value goes up or down. If the value goes under 0, you get a notification that says something like, we should send workers to farm or build more farms or things of that nature. And then what happens is, if they stay in the red for too long, you get a notification that says, we are starving. And starving units lose hit points over time. Not a rapid number of hit points over time, but not a number that you can actually ignore. You won't lose the game immediately, barring some raids and some shenanigans to it, but you will lose some. And actually, this means that you have to macro your economy, how you focus your economy, and slower movement speed, says Torch as well, when you're starving. So you don't want to be starving. It's super bad. But again, how do you do that? Do you want to have do you want to be efficient on workers? Again, this is for the hardcore players who care about this. For a new player, it's super good for them that they can go and just like, oh shit, I'm starving, take a bunch of workers, bam, throw 3 of them on top of each of these farms, and then I'm good. But for a more experienced player, you might say, hey, if my economy is good, but I don't have a lot of space, am I going to want to make fewer farms so that I can use the resources to build more structures? Maybe I have a lot of space on this spawn, so I want to maximize the efficiency of my workers. I want them to mine gold and lumber, so I'm going to make as many farms as possible, take up more space. But that does make me more harassable. But what's interesting about that is that I can then power farm if there's something really wrong. Like, oh, dude, yeah, you could choose to max out every farm. You could choose to min every farm. You could choose to make a lot of farms at first and then expand onto them more. The food mechanic itself, if you don't get it, you don't get it. It feels less punishing than supply depots, because here's the thing. There's not a supply limit in the traditional sense of games, right? I actually think that this food system, it would not surprise me if the developer was a big fan of Mother, like Mother 3, those kinds of games. And the reason I say that is that this, Ness and Outland and all of those guys, right? The reason I say that is, traditional RTS game food supplies are very much like Final Fantasy hit points. The monster does 500 damage, and you have 617 health. You take 500 damage, you go to 117. It's subtractive. Same thing in these in StarCraft 2 and those kinds of inspired RTS games. Oh, the supply cap that you're at right now is 63. Did you make a supply structure? Well, if you did make a supply structure, I don't give a fuck what your economy looks like. You're stuck at 63 of 63. You are maxed out until you make more supply. Then you can go over that limit. Whereas this is more like Mother. This is more like when Nest takes a hit in those games. If you've ever played those games, they go for, let's say there's an attack, it does 200 damage, right? Same thing, it's 500 damage, you're at 517 or 617. Whereas in Final Fantasy, you just go to 117 health. In the Mother series, you get hit for 500, and then the amount of damage that the attack did controls how quickly your hit points iterate down. So you don't go from 617 to 117, you go 617, 583, 487, 393, etc., and it just spins down. The reason this matters is that in a turn-based game like Mother, you can actually use the time that you're losing hit points and from an attack that would kill you, but you're not dead yet, to heal. So here's the difference, right? In Mother, if I'm at 100 and I take if I'm at 20 and I take 20, but I had very few hit points left, and it's going 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14. Oh, wait, at 4, I heal myself again, right? This creates like a rolling cascading effect. That's exactly what's happening in the Scouring with the food, right? If you're starving, you can fix it if you made good early game decisions. If you don't, then you can power build with all of your workers to make a farm and chunk them on top of the farm as well. The game never stops you from actually generating from actually going negative in supply, right? I've hit the worker limit, like the limit of number of workers that you're able to make inside of the game several times. But what's interesting about all of this is that there's not a thing explicitly in the game that says like, all right, now, Bob, you have 100 supply of units and that's it. The game just says, yeah, at a certain amount of time, you're not allowed to make more workers. And the food cost of your army and all of your workers is going to actually make it prohibitive for you to make more. But fuck it, if you can figure out how to do that, like, go for it. That's super fun. Right? So I think that is super fun. That gives a lot more. First off, again, you can power farm and stick 3 on it. This is very good for casual players. Hardcore players are going to be really intrigued by the math of doing these things, the spatial considerations versus the economy efficiencies versus what state of the game they're at versus how defensive versus offensive they want to be, right? Versus whether or not they want to build farms to scout. There's so much stuff going on in this game, right? Right? It's so good. And then here's the thing. Listen, we're just going to wrap up with 2 things that this is something, again, I don't understand why these new RTS titles made by these big companies with millions of dollars, lots of experienced developers, more importantly, lots of experienced producers and designers, and they don't understand this. So we'll just get to the simple one. Now, why is this game more popular outside of the United States? Now, I'm not a sociological expert, right? I can't do like an anthropological study of all of the different cultures and nations and all of their things. But anecdotally, it seems to me the fact that this could be played on a toaster for half a gigabyte might be more important. Because if you live in the United States, you take for granted that everyone has a PC of a certain capability if they are a gamer. Right, yeah. Oh, dude, also Dr. Wumpus makes a good point that a lot of people in NA have slid away or shied away from the RTS genre, right? They tend to be there at the beginning of an RTS, but they don't tend to stick around, most of them, or the ones that do, for whatever reason, it's very rare for them to get to that uppermost, tip-top, highest level. But here's the thing. Why is this game more successful in Asian countries and Eastern Europe? I would suggest, without stepping on a landmine, that the fact that this runs on less expensive computers, because I lived overseas for a while, so I have some idea as to what I'm talking about. If we want to talk about lived experience, I definitely have it in this side, right? So if you live in a country or in a culture where either the PCs are of very low power, like computational power and capacity, there's only 2 ways that this goes. Your family owns that PC, and your family owns it, God forbid you own it, or there are LAN cafes, PC cafes, things like this, where it is an accepted cultural idea that you're all saving money and experience like a bar moment, right? A guy's bar moment, overwhelmingly male, but whoever wants to be there can. And you just do this together as a group. But the fact that this is toaster proof and that like GLaDOS could run on this on a potato actually makes it really important. That's kind of a necessity. That kind of advances the utility of the Scouring. The size is really important, right? The ping is really important, right? I'm playing with people who have 240 ping. They're on the other side of the planet from me, and I have 240 ping. Hello? And then also just a bit of marketing here. Dear current RTS developers, you know who you are if you're watching this, right? Yeah, you're catching a stray on this one, but all of you have too much marketing money and too much of a budget to not understand what I'm going to tell you, but you didn't take it to heart. You refuse to understand it. Steam likes dark games. I don't know how much more I can say that. Steam does not tend to like spicy sci-fi futuristic chrome nightmare, right? They don't like the look of those things, right? They like the look of something that's a bit fucked up looking, like Borderlands. They like something that has its imperfections, but still gives something like soulful, like Skyrim, right? Or this is what people will tell you if you ask them. They like horror games. All of you who are more industry people, you know the name Chris Zukowski. You know the How to Market a Game channel. I know you've done consultations with Steam and with Epic. You know that they would tell you horror games, dark aesthetics, right? Recyclable but new, intense experiences are what people like. They like either cookie, how to say, they like cozy games and they like dark games. They like things that make people that play Steam games want something that makes them feel content or something that has viscera in it, right? I have no idea how that was missing and why it took until the Scouring to show that that's the case. Have you not seen the popularity of Dota 2, right? Have you not been paying attention to how all of these desaturized, like just suckless, soulless looking pastel colored wonderkins aren't doing it? I know you know this, but the Scouring actually did it. The Scouring actually has a dark game. Because let's think about it. I said this in a tweet. I'll find it because Stormgate, I'm saying this only because I made a tweet in response to this, right? Stormgate had a lot of conversations in its community, internal defenders and external excoriators, right? Not just haters, like vitriol, like huge levels of anger people explained that they didn't like the art style. And there was a lot of cope that maybe people just don't understand stylized art graphics. Until finally I made a post that I said, it is not that people don't like the art style, it is that they are playing a war game. They are playing a war game about killing things. Even the most lighthearted game about killing people you can think of is like Among Us. There's still someone decapitating another person and their bone protruding from their body, right? The games that don't have player removal, but it's not explicit war, tend to be like a Fall Guys equivalent. I don't understand why this was not understood. But again, this game gets it. There's violence, there's blood. The undead enemies that appear from nowhere disappear into nowhere. No one has a problem with that. But when shots are getting fired from cannons and blasting up towers, you see the dust and the dirt. You see the corpses that are in the ground and then they desiccate, much like they do in Warcraft 3. This is what people want. They don't want your sci-fi high fantasy, right? They want low fantasy, right? You might find the idea of something like in anime or in manga. You might not like Berserk. You might not like Goblin Slayer, right? You might think it's almost to the point of parody. Something like Attack on Titan when the bodies just get eaten up and consumed. That's what the Steam audience likes. And the only time that I've seen otherwise is like Carbot. You know what I mean? And like no one wants a mobile game aesthetic. Which is hilarious because the Scouring's unit models, listen, no hate on the game. Its visual clarity is amazing for this. But the unit models, just looking at a vacuum in the starting screen, they almost look like Clash of Clans, except they have their potency, their darkness, their shadows built into them. They look hefty, as if what you're doing is a thing of consequence, right? And also, visual clarity in this game, once again, a thing that these new RTS games don't get. The Scouring is going to just scour the floor off of all these other RTS games with it. The player count is already showing that it will, because this is something that they get. This is the wisdom of their approach, right? Is that the enemies pop. Wolves, big spiky fur, black, dark brown, pops. Undead enemies, pastel like ivory, like a bit washed out, actually washed paint out looking color for their skin, dark clothes. All of the enemies, munchers, big, can't mistake them for the ground. Archers, don't they have like a quiver? And there's stuff that makes it pretty easy. You can see what they're doing. Any melee attacker that gets the defendability, brings up a shield, instantly reflective, separates itself from this very dark looking ground, right? This like Valheim looking ground, and they pop and come to life with that. The lines of sight for the cannons, just an off-white color, but on a dark green and on a dismal blue and on a swampy color and texture of earth, right? Like and with the buildings themselves, that same like growing gray colors, so they pop out. Visually aesthetic, like the aesthetic, amazing. But the clarity, not so good, truthfully. But the ability to discern what's happening on the screen, phenomenal. Like the only, and here's the thing too. Even things like the building size contribute to this being phenomenal for readability's sake, right? Because it not only large buildings not only contribute to the idea that we want to spread out a kingdom, we want to make more, we want to go attack, we want to have a big, huge conglomeration of things, but it also makes it easier to see what is mine? Where is it built? What does it look like, right? Even the fallowness of the farms are probably the closest thing you could get to saying, you kind of fucked up there, actually. That farm, like when there's no workers on it, there's no plants on it. Yeah, when there's plants on it, it's green, vibrant, no one has any complaints. I can tell immediately what's happening. But when the workers aren't on it, it looks a bit fallow, looks a bit dingy, except it is a flat gray pot of land. And also, designer developer combination, this team understands it, because what do they have on the farms? Little stumps that are the things that hold the hit points to show you, oh wait, that stump, that texture, that like thing next to the fallow field, that indicates, that gives visual cognition, it gives you visual noise that the farm is what it is. So I've been talking for an hour and a half, but the TLDR, their outro, the wrap up. There's a bunch of games that are being made that want to talk about being the spiritual successor to old classic RTS titles. They have no idea what they're looking for or doing or why it's wrong. They are kind of mirroring the trends of people from years past. And I think the Scouring is killing them, because this is a game that has, it's very easy to teach. It appeals to exactly the yellow paint structures that all of the players who are newer to RTS want. It gives them the wall building RTS defensive structure style that they want. It gives the Steam audience the low fantasy dark aesthetic that it wants. For the hardcore players, it still gives them access to ranked. It gives them access to replays. It has all of the control clicking and shift moving and hotkeys and control groups that you could ever possibly want, and all of the minutia of the units and their upgrades are extremely consequential and allow a huge swath of skill to represent itself. People with 50 APM, 20 APM can come into this feeling like it is the new RTS that they've always wanted, because the RTS genre had left them behind. But more experienced players will have a lot of things to do, not only on the craziness of the maps, but also figuring out what to do with creeps in a game that heretofore doesn't have heroes, and just provides them a lot of options, especially with things like cannons and the castable abilities, and even the more deeper nuances of things like expanding and potions. So that's it, everyone. Last time I did a rant like this is about something I didn't like, or I felt had betrayed me. But this time I want you to know the Scouring is amazing. You should go play it. It's incredibly lightweight. The demo is up right now. It's free. This is the game, even over my own home game, that I would recommend, that a player who feels betrayed by the RTS genre, like they can't find something that's for them, like the whole esports wave has taken them and left them behind, and they can't get into it. This is the game to play. This is the game that cares about free-for-all. This is the game that cares about the team environment, the 2v2. This is the game that can help you relive, maybe not the classic adventure of something like a Brood War, but definitely the classic adventure of something like a big game Hunters. That's the vibe that this has. It hits all of the aesthetic marks, all of the control marks, and gives so much to do. And on top of that, the dev just has a cohesive vision, which is more than I can say for some of its competitors. So if you see me on the ladder, go ahead and scour me from your records and plummet my rating. But you might also find me in some team games, because I think I found a new favorite.